it didn't matter if they were on the way home from the pubs, or if they were in the shower, or if they were on their way to school. They had their job was to answer the phone no matter what, even if they were sleeping. And it was kind of funny because actually for a day our prime minister answered the phone too. So when people called from New Zealand or so, it was our prime minister answering the phone and asked whatever they wanted to know about Sweden. So that was a campaign we were doing for 6 months, and so you'd have to be creative to get out through the bus, even though, again, you can't answer them all, but you can create a little bus at least.
You think we could do that here? Call a random American? I don't feel the enthusiasm. I think we might want to try it.
A question to General. Thank you, ma'am, for your service, first of all. Do you think that we have to have both legal and moral restrictions against our government attempts, intelligence and defense, at character attacking foreign leaders, especially those whose policies are harmful to our interest? In other words, through fake accounts, trolling. Can we do that? May we do that in response to what they're doing to us?
There's several good books out on this now about InfoWars, War in 147 Characters, the ability of nation states or rogue actors to use social media for promoting war or promoting disinformation, promoting falseness within different countries. Many countries now are making this to be a crime. Malaysia now makes it a crime that if you knowingly spread a falsehood, you can be charged. We're going to see much more of this in the EU this year as they look to how to restrict tech and protect privacy. What's going to happen with Facebook in the US and privacy accounts, it's going to be very interesting to see. I don't think in this country, at least in the last year, what we have seen is there is not a strong interest in making more laws, not to just restrict privacy, but to prevent the spread of false information. But it may become more, I think, of a need that we do some of this, especially based on what other countries are doing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops.
Could I take the opportunity to just mention another example I was thinking about? How many of you knew who the Swedish Greta Thunberg was 6 months ago? Do you know who it is today? No? Did you hear about the climate change demonstration in 125 countries yesterday? Yes, that's a 16-year-old girl. I mean, I'm not going to talk policies here, but she's starting a climate strike back in Sweden. Used social media, got a lot of attention. She's only 16 years old. And yesterday they were doing this in 125 countries. 16 years old. So she know how to use social media. She created a buzz.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer your question, but I think the issue of the 16-year-old in Sweden and the 125 countries, what we have to do, and again, this is taking a little bit of time and leaning back and looking at it, is to see if this is a moment or a movement. I'm hoping that it's a movement, but too much coverage too early can also take oxygen and not just provide it. And I think we saw that in the United States a year ago. This was the week of Parkland. So tremendous demonstrations last year because of Parkland on the whole issue of exercising responsibility with guns. And this week, there was also a demonstration that was probably 1/20th the size, if not less, in Washington, D.C. than the original one. Now, those kids have been very active during the summer and going into the election cycle, all really good, but I think the jury's out on that, too. So I don't work for the U.S. government, so I can have an opinion on anything. So I think it's really dangerous to regulate it. The adversary's not regulating. Whether they're a small actor, not a nation state, or a nation state, they're conducting those attacks. And there have been a lot of challenges in the United States dealing with them when they were first discovered in 2016. And part of the challenge is somebody thought that some people discussed the notion of applying nuclear deterrence because it was information, much the same way I described launch detection, right? So that's normal. And there is this concept of proportionate response, right? Okay. In cyber, every move that is in response to another action is seen as escalatory in nature. So this notion of mutual assured destruction, you do something, we're going to do something, we're going to do it at a time and place of our choosing, is a good script, but not reality. And probably the most successful deterrent effect is to find the attack and turn the lights on and direct people from both sides of the aisle if it's in politics, or both sides of the issue if it's not, and say, this are the people that are trying to manipulate this discussion. Because there's no evidence so far that the Russian attack in the United States, and I might point out there were several other countries attacking in the United States, not just the Russians, but the Russian notion was to alter the voter, not the vote, and to divide countries internally and then divide them from each other, which is what their attacks were in Europe over the individual national elections over the last 24 months, or 18 months. And they're attacking now in the European parliamentary elections. But they're seeking to divide countries internally and then divide them from each other. And one only needs to look at the length of time it has taken European countries to form governments in parliamentary systems after the election. So.
Okay, sure.
I had written a piece a while back on things I would like to see media do. And one of them is to provide information on how to recognize a fake news story. Show me what one looks like. Show me what a post looks like from a bot. How will I recognize that? Perform the public service and the community service that you were meant to do, and educate, and continue to teach me how to see these things and recognize them. We see very little of that. So if I see something on Facebook or Instagram, sometimes I don't know or can't tell. And yes, it is very, very time-consuming to figure it out. I would also like to see media spend less time promoting their own celebrity. I have a real problem with some of these talk show hosts who promote their books during their time where they're supposed to be discussing issues, whether it's Jake Tapper or Smirkanish. Oh, I want to see them perform the public service that journalism is meant to do and get away from the cult of celebrity, which is where we are now.
Now, that seems like a little bit of a paradox with the public service and for-profit media, concentration in the media. So indeed, we may forget, remember with the, this was during the Clinton years, with the digital broadcasting realm. I remember I was working with Common Cause in New Hampshire, and we were saying this is going to be a big, big profit for these companies, and we need to save some digital space for public dialogue, public service, because they all operate under a license, and you can actually go and try to get them to open up their books about that public service mission. But we're seeing even greater concentration in the media, and it's seen more as a business. And you don't hear so much about the public mission. So I think that's part of the problem there. Did you have a comment to add, Monica?
I just want to add, we had election in Sweden last fall, and something that our Swedish Civil Contingency Agency did before the election, during like 1.5 years, they did an education tour where they went around to the whole Sweden, to every municipality, and did an education tour about misinformation and disinformation. And they also started a different sort of report system, so local like mayors and their staff could report if things were going on that were interfering with election. And I think also I mean, it's hard, but education and talk about it and highlighting the importance of I mean, when it's happening, disinformation and misinformation, so people know that it's happening is very important.
Is this a matter of information literacy as a basic human right? I mean, there's kind of a movement towards that. There are a few more questions. We've got just a few minutes left, so why don't we go to those?
Thank you. If I'd consider Facebook and Twitter being weapons of information, what kind of weapons are they? First strike weapons, weapons of defense, sword or shield?
Yes. So the challenge for Facebook, and a couple of us were talking about this before the panel. So coming out of 16, and now, partway into 19, I really think they're in their Oppenheimer moment. That I am the destroyer of worlds, and they're wrestling with that against their business imperative, which is to make money for them and their shareholders, and they're truly wrestling with that. But they are, like any platform, ubiquitous and multi-role, multi-purpose.
Hi, it's a question for John, please. So you said that you don't believe that information warfare or the industries of strategic communication companies should be regulated, I think in response to a question over there. Did I hear that correctly? No. Oh. Would you mind replying?
So the question was whether the use of false information should be regulated.
Okay.
I was talking about that.
Well, okay, but I would still, if I may, like to ask you about...
We get credit for getting to the...
Yeah.
Not jumping right in on a piece of,
Yeah, I wanted to check.
false facts.
Yeah, indeed. Certainly not alternative ones. I wanted to ask you, the propaganda hasn't changed much, but what has changed is perhaps the mode of delivery and the ways in which data is used behind driving those messages and honing those messages for the audiences. We have a very scary, rapidly transforming digital era, in my view. And that isn't just about technologies, that's also about the forces of change in our whole world, about climate change, migration as a result of that, conflicts, and so forth. As I see it, particularly in the global context, you can't really manage this problem without sort of cleaning up the entire industry, because it has been, really problematic in making us vulnerable to Russia recently, and in making us vulnerable to these kinds of targeted campaigns of false information, which you're saying we shouldn't be regulating. What is your answer to this? More campaigns?
Well, I don't have an answer. I'll tell you what I'm thinking. So first, the early part of your question about propaganda hasn't changed is accurate. In fact, the use of information goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. So the delivery systems have changed, and the ability of those delivery systems, the multiplicity of them, meaning there are more, and their ability to be more precise has also changed over time. The reality is, in this next presidential election in 2020, if you're using Facebook, you will get a personal television commercial based on the issues that matter to you from both parties. And we can now target the video to you based on your previous searches. And if you search for the environment, the global climate change movement, for example, which I think is important. But if you care more about oceans than you care about trees, that commercial will talk about oceans, talk about the giant plastic island in the Pacific. All of that's going on, and people are manipulating that. But the issue of manipulation isn't new. It's existed for a long time. There's a body of work that looked at the anti-nuke movement in the United States funded by the oil companies in order to achieve a commercial outcome that they would exist longer. So how to deal with the existence of false facts wrapped in a package of true facts designed to change the discourse you're having and move it. And I really do think I don't think you could regulate it. If you regulate it, people are going to find a way around the regulation. So that's just not going to, they'll pass the bill and then nobody will pay attention to the bill they pass. And self-regulation, gee, I think that's a great idea, except something's going to alter that too. So I think the best thing is to actually have an honest discussion about the issue, whether the issue are candidates or policies, and unpack those true facts and stack them up against the false facts. I had a conversation with a friend the other day, which probably means 24 hours ago, and she was confronted with an organization that was attacking her organization, and they had written the proverbial letter outlining all the attacks. And I said, what you really need to do is unpack the attack. Just take it out line by line. Okay? And as soon as the bad information comes out, right, then you join it as it moves. So your response to them not telling the truth and being able to detail that, and this is where under projection is more important than over projection. And so everybody's going, what is he talking about? So if the number of whatever you're looking at is 512, you can say more than 500, you can say almost 500, or you can say around 500. If you say around 500, the journalist that will pursue the validation of your assumption will say, well, it's not around 500, it's 512. And they will move the story larger. Okay? Because they're looking for specificity. You can use generalizations. But to your point, which I think is an excellent point, but we shouldn't forget this has been going on for a long time. I mean, manipulation of other people's elections has been a tenet of foreign policy of great powers forever. The tools they use are different. And the fact that they got to individual citizens in the United States and the technique they used, which you helped discover, by the way, so I think you deserve a round of applause from everybody in the United States. But the reality is they picked up false flag stories in marginal organizations, right? And then they gave them to people who could not resist the temptation to propagate it. And when the propagation failed, they took false identities on the net, right? That's the bot play, right? And they elevated even more until it could get into mainstream discourse. And it is very similar to the art form of disinformation that existed in the Cold War, early 60s, when they used release points of credible, quasi-credible publications in India, gave it to India, and then had it picked up by a Brit. And then once it was picked up by the British, it moved one more step along, and the Russians, or the Soviets at the time, measured their success as if when they could get it on to nightly news in the United States. If they could plant a false story in India, no matter how long it took, if it appeared on nightly news, they had succeeded in their mission. Right. So. Thank you. Yeah.
We are actually over time now, unfortunately, and this is just day one. So for anyone watching on live stream, day two, character assassination and populism, challenges and responses, we're just kicking off. And I would like to thank the panelists. You all were excellent. I've got more questions now than ever, and I haven't decided if things are getting better or worse. It may be somewhere in between, but as a moderate independent seeking more visibility, I don't mind being in the middle on this. So thank you all for joining us today.
And I would like to thank wonderful Dr. Snow for coming here all the way from Japan, just for us, for moderating this panel.
That's a little bit of
and
false statement, but I didn't just fly in. But we had, I think, from Information Democracy, someone wanted to speak briefly.
Oh, yeah, let's talk finally about democracy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karel Janeček. I am the founder of the Institute H21. And I am glad to see so many people who are aware of the danger of populism, of the threats that we are facing globally as the whole world. And indeed, the threats are mounting on one side, but fortunately on the better side, we also have great opportunities. And we as an institute, we have a great tool. There is not much time. Actually, many people believe that there is going to be a big change in the world, either towards much worse or towards much better, but we don't have a choice. It's either up or down. And we as an institute, we have developed a very powerful tool which can help on this path, which will increase significantly the probability of being successful. And I would like to ask you for less than 5 minutes, if you have this, if you could please go or take this paper and fill in 2 questions, answer 2 questions in 2 different ways. And you will see why it is very simple. In fact, I will talk about it tomorrow, but please give us the less than 5 minutes. I believe it is very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And as a token of appreciation from George Mason University to our panelists, please again give them a round of applause, and there are some gifts for you. So we're going to take about an hour break, and I will see you in the Oz restaurant down the street. So that's all for today for official panels. Feel free to talk among yourselves, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Very quickly.